Right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to a special one-off event from the DMIS Society. This evening we have both Anne and Neil with us to discuss the recent UCU strikes. Just basically give an overview to students as to why the strikes are happening and also what the future plans of the UCU are. And before we go any further, I was wondering if you would like to introduce yourselves and just speak about your relationships to the UCU. Neil, you're on my left, so you can go first.
Okay, hi everybody. I can't actually see anybody. I can see two black boxes, and that's it. So it's different from being face to face. Sorry, I can do this face to face. So I'm in COVID isolation at the moment. So I'm in my son's bedroom, as you can sort of see the decor behind me. So I'm from Glasgow originally, and I work in School of Modern Languages and Cultures. Specifically, I'm in English for Academic Study. So we work with a lot of international students, Chinese and Saudis being the two biggest groups. And I've been a member of UCU for, I'm not sure, maybe 6 years. I started out at the university on a lot of hourly paid type of contracts, which will be a familiar story for a lot of people who work in academia. And to my shame, I didn't join the union for, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years of that sort of period. Then I joined. The union put out a call for help for people to volunteer in whatever way they could. And I became a caseworker. So caseworking, stop me if I'm going on for too long here, by the way, brief introduction. So caseworking, you know, we're all volunteers, and if any staff member has any kind of question, difficulties, bullying, contract questions, anything like that, then the union puts out a call for people to help them, and we might represent them in meetings, etc. So I did that for a couple of years, and I still do that. And then I became College of Arts rep 3 years ago, maybe, not sure, because the whole COVID period has confused my understanding of time, sometime just before COVID. And so I'm now the College of Art rep. You might have seen the occasional email that I've sent out college-wide. I tend to be a bit more active within the School of Modern Languages. And that's maybe enough. Anne?
Okay, thanks, Neil. So most of you will know me, most of you, if not all of you, will know me as one of your lecturers in information studies, but I'm here with my UCU hat on. So I've been a member for quite a few years, 30 plus I think now actually, and I've held office locally. So that means the local branch in Glasgow University. I was secretary for about 10 years there, and I've also held positions nationally. A couple of years ago, I was in the 2017-18 strikes. I was UCU Scotland president. That gave me, it was a really interesting job actually. And I'm currently a member of the National Executive Committee, and then part of that is a higher education committee, because the UCU is basically split into two sides. There's the HE and then there's the FE, so further education. We don't organise in further education in Scotland. That's organised by EIS, but I represent UK members on the Higher Education Committee, and we're the people who make decisions based on stuff coming up through branches, because we're basically a democratic organisation. So the individuals may bring motions about whatever it might be to local branch, and we'll enact them. It could be about PNDR, it could be about bullying, it could be about casualisation, and those then filter their way through different processes up to the Higher Education Committee, and it's our job then to ensure that those get enacted. And during times of industrial action, we meet fairly regularly to discuss strategies and ways forward. I don't talk a lot about my UCU work when I'm lecturing and teaching, because I think that's important to kind of keep the two roles slightly divided in there for students. But like Neil, loads of casework. I mean, that's the brunt of trade union work, is not very exciting, and you guys will only really come across this when we're on picket lines and dispute, but we do a huge amount of work behind the scenes in terms of helping staff with all sorts of issues. And I too, like Neil, started my career 1,000 years ago. I was on hourly paid contracts. At that point, you were just paid at the biscuit tin, literally. It was almost cash in hand. And then I've been on various fixed term contracts and different posts. So those are the kind of big issues, but I'll let that, so that's my background in there, and I do have a quite a good understanding of disputes, but I'll stop there.
I think just before we go into the specifics of the sort of the current strikes, or I should say the strikes of the last few years and ongoing, one thing I wanted to say, like I'll be open about this myself. I've been members of unions for over a decade. I worked in hospitality, which is, I'm sure you can imagine, a world of 0-hour contracts and heinous acts beyond imagination. And finally, they're beginning to unionise correctly. And you're actually seeing this with companies like Abandoned Ship and Brewdog in Glasgow, the differences that it's making. I think are incredibly important. Just before we speak about the strikes, I was wondering, I'll start with you, Anne. Can you just speak to everyone? Obviously, people are going to be going into the job world, some for the first time in about a year and a half. Why do you think it's important for people to be members of trade unions?
Well, I think they're quite interested. I've certainly seen in the last 5 or 10 years a resurgence in people understanding that the best way to deal with appalling employment practices is to be trade unionised. We do have serious anti-trade union laws in this country that actually make it really difficult for us to take action and do things. But I mean, you're probably all members of one of the unions in the university here, so you might remember the GUU or the QM, and you'll be affiliated to the SRC, and that is like a trade union. So it's the National Union of Students, which is exactly that. As an organisation, like any trade union, is there to represent its members and to fight for better conditions, better terms and conditions, and better working practices. And you can see in places like universities, which are well unionised and have people doing good work, employment practices, although not brilliant, are a hell of a lot better than they are in hospitality or shop or things like the gig economy. And there's a lot of work being done with people like the STUC to try and bring together those groups, just as Ailwen was saying there. I think it really is important to join a trade union, whether you don't have to be an activist, you don't have to be, but it's your fees and your subs go towards allowing people time to do the representation that's required and getting that recognition, so that there's a formal recognition between the employer and the trade union, then allows for negotiations to happen and that's why you'll hear things like union busting, and companies trying to stop workers from organising together, because of course one person can do what they can, but people are much stronger when they're together in a trade union, working together for that. So yeah, I mean, I would always strongly encourage anybody to join the trade union that can represent them in their workplace.
And Neil, would you like to speak on that?
Yeah, funnily enough, I made some notes on this type of point in quite an abstract sort of way just earlier before I came to the meeting. And the reason for this was because I was thinking, how did I grow up thinking about unions? So being a Glaswegian, unions were quite they were always something that we knew about. My dad wasn't a ship worker in a factory or anything, but we knew about unions. And then I think in the 70s and 80s, now I know that the audience here is probably a bit young to know too much about 70s and 80s, but there was very much a perception through the media that unions were full of militant leftists and lazy people, and and I think so. I think how the media likes to frame and has framed unions for a long time has to be put on one side. It's one lens that some people see unions through, and the other is maybe the sort of more Central European and Western European lens, where it's a constructive development of the social contract, where unions work constructively with employers to see a kind of a mutual benefit. And I mean, to use modern parlance, it's kind of stakeholder type of, stakeholders of various different interests coming together for for everybody's benefit. And I felt that the way that Britain went for a long time and continues to go, it's like managers know best, and they don't like interference from these upstarts that are saying, maybe this would work better for everybody if we did it this way. So that was kind of my perspective on unions, I think, and I've always felt that it should be a constructive way to improve everybody's life, rather than employers thinking, okay, we're just going to impose X, Y, and Z so we can make more money. And I think there was one other thing I was going to say. Obviously, Anne's touched on the point about unionised workforces just generally having better conditions, and the point about if you're isolated as individuals working for a business, that employers like that because they can pick you off, and and they hate it when you speak on behalf of a group of people. They say, well, if this is an issue, you come and speak to me personally about it, because they know that collectively they're going to be you know, they're going to have to make some kind of concessions, and it's going to be more difficult for them to push things through. So I think that's my, it's a bit abstract maybe, but that's how I came to see unions. And I think one of the problems, just to repeat this point, one of the big problems I think in the UK, and especially education, I think is one of the areas that has the most industrial action, or has had over the last 20 years. And there's probably a reason for that, is that we are unionized, and at the same time, employers are taking that old-fashioned approach of we know what's best, and they're not working constructively with people. So it's resulted in these quite frequent battles, because nobody's working like they seem to do in Germany, strategically together.
Yeah, no, I think they're very fair points. I think something that struck me with what you were saying there, Neil, as well, is that it can sometimes seem very political with the likes of, like, if you're going all the way back to Arthur Scargill, or in more recent times, the likes of Len McCluskey, it can seem like these are very political battles, but actually it's to do with a power hierarchy, and it's to do with an evening out of that power hierarchy and managing to, exactly as you say, become a stakeholder in the companies you work for. I think a good starting place with the recent strikes would be two major points, really. One, how long have they been going on for? When did they start? And then secondly, what is the major sticking points that have led to the strikes? Neil, if you'd like to speak on this first.
Sorry, I had trouble with the mute button there, as I usually do in meetings. Anne's probably going to have to help me out on the timeline here, because the pensions, if we talk, so there's two disputes, aren't there? So there's the USS pension, and then there's the four fights strike. So we're talking about both in this meeting, are we? Yeah. Okay, so the pension one, was it 2018? And was that the first time? I mean, it's been going on for ages, the erosion of the pensions. I mean, I'll carry on for a second, but Anne can correct me on the timeline in a second if she knows. I think the first time I noticed it, so when I started at university, we still had final salary pensions, which have been removed from much of the workplaces. So those types of pensions, you accrue a percentage of whatever salary that you're on when you come to retirement. So if you were on, I don't know, say £40,000 on your day of retirement, you would have accrued some kind of percentage of that, and you would be guaranteed, you know, so if you worked long enough, I mean, it would be impossible to do, but if you were able to work long enough, you could get your salary in retirement. I think you'd have to work for, in the beginning, when the pension, when I joined, it was at maybe 60 or 65 years, you'd have to work to get that full pension, but that's potentially what you could get. Then those were eroded. There was then an attempt to erode the guarantee of even like a guaranteed amount of money. So a lot of pensions, you know what you've contributed, but you don't know what you're going to get from it. So it depends on its performance in its stocks and shares, you know, portfolios, etc. And the type of pension that we were in, or we thought we were in, was you were accruing a fixed amount of money in retirement, regardless of how the pension fund performed. So that's what we thought we were in, and then that was being eroded. And Anne, I'm hoping, is going to come in and save me in terms of some of the more specifics of it.
So, I mean, what Neil said there is a really simple, a really good way of talking about it. So the USS is the university's, university superannuation scheme, and it was set up quite about maybe 60 years ago or so, between the then trade union who represented academic and related staff, the AUT, and employers, because people had at that point, there were little local schemes within different universities and different things, and it became this idea, well, let's all do this together, because then you have more and it was a really good, well set up scheme. And as Neil says, there have been various attempts over the years to erode it down. There is a bit of debate about the whole final salary versus care, and care is careers' average earnings. So there is the final salary scheme often played better to people who were pals with people in management, who when they came towards retirement suddenly got huge extra salary towards the last couple of years of their time. So for instance, people, particularly women, care schemes could actually work out better because they were dipping in and out of the being employed. They might not be hitting those top VP salary levels. So we worked back and forward with that, and that was about 2010, 11. But the big hit came in 17, 18, when the employers decided to really attack what Neil has talked about there, and that was the direct benefit. So basically, you can add more into your salary, into your pension. So you can do what we call direct contributions, and that's adding in more. And people above a certain salary level could add in more, and that worked much more like, you know, it's in play with the markets, how you invest it. But the DB bit was guaranteed. And it was kind of like basically what we would call a top of the senior lecturer salary, where we negotiate pay to UCU does that nationally. And they really battered that. And actually it was a huge mistake by the employers, because it was so callous and so clearly detrimental that actually our members galvanised extraordinarily well around about it. I mean, 14 days of strikes way back in 2018, and we moved the employers at that point. They came back to the table and they adjusted the stuff so the direct benefit was not hit anywhere as well. And out of that, we got a joint expert panel deliberately set up to do work with USS to ensure that we didn't come to this place again. And so what happened this time is that the USS gets valued every so often to see how much it's worth, how much it's paying out, and how much people are paying into. And the valuation happened in March 2020. I don't really have to tell all of you here what was happening to us in March 2020, which is exactly 2 years ago. And the markets, funnily enough, were in fluctuation. So the valuation came back showing us the USS to be in deficit, which meant you've either got to get out less or pay more. You know, people are expected to pay more for percentage into it. UCU, and I think lots of other people as well, thought that having a valuation for the scheme in March 2020 was not the best time, because the markets were in a particular space at that point. And back and forward we've gone between then and the valuation and where we are now. With employers, it is a bit tricky because we don't negotiate directly with USS, we negotiate with UUK, who are our employers. That's the university's UK, so that's like a group of employers, you know, the vice principals and across the universities, and USS is a separate beast to that, although some of the faces are the same. So we have to negotiate with UUK. And not to go into the massive detail, was that UUK, there was a couple of things that USS put forward. UUK put forward their solution, as it were. So whereas employers paid a bit more and staff paid a bit more, but there was a huge detriment to that direct benefit. And in fact, UCU's done some modelling, and so is USS. And it looks, I mean, I just did my modelling on USS. This is the direct benefit part of your pension. So if you paid in more, that sits in a different place. But mine looks like it's been cut by 30+% at the moment. And it's kind of like it's one of these unwritten laws that in academia, that we don't get paid as much as other people who have our levels of knowledge and skills and experience and education, you know, like lawyers or doctors in that way. But the kind of unwritten rule was that we had a decent pension at the end of it, and good employment. And those two have been seriously eroded over the past few years. So the fact that, you know, and my pension, and I'm much closer to retirement than younger colleagues, for younger colleagues coming in who are not even necessarily in secure employment, and have all this stuff, buying houses, all the rest of it, it really is. And that, I think, is the biggest concern, is that the whole scheme has been eroded, and we see some employers wanting to come out of the scheme, and thus making it less secure. So I mean, that's pretty much where we are now. UCU tabled an alternative proposal. I'm not going into the massive big details in there, but because I'm not an economist, I'm not a pensions expert. But UUK, there was some not great things around that. UUK didn't really consult properly with their members on the UCU proposals, and at a meeting a couple of weeks ago for the Joint Negotiating Committee at USS, the employers' sides went through. And because we have two people on the Joint Committee, we got two people from UCU side, and there's 2 members from the employer side, and there's supposed to be a neutral chair, but the neutral chair voted with the employers and it's gone through. So we're now at the stage now where and USS are now modelling our pensions, so we can go in and see that. And it sounds, I mean, it is a difficult thing because, you know, when you're just starting out in your job and your career and you're, you know, you're 20, 21, 22, you know, retirement seems unfeasible. The idea that you might be doing that, and the idea you might try and save some money so that when you retire, you've got a good level of income, you know, and we see rising prices in gas and electricity. And so pensions are a big thing because they are our own money. They're deferred wages. So they come out of our wages. You know, it's not like it's a little give and take. So we're paying for it out of our wages now in order for us to have a decent retirement. And this particular reaction, particularly to the March 2020 evaluation, has just made it extraordinarily difficult, I think. Yeah, Neil, does that?
Yeah, I was going to say, because that's really good and much better on the detail that I would be. I think something that's maybe worth highlighting for people is that, you know, the members of the USS scheme, the members of UCU, some of them are experts in, I don't know, laser physics or medieval French poetry, etc. But we've got experts in pensions. You know, some of the people that are working for us, you know, the UCU members, are the people who taught the subject, actuaries, whatever the name of the subject is, actuarial science or whatever you call it. They're the people that taught them. So it's not like we've got an expert in medieval French poetry. Sorry to take that example. I hope you don't, nobody's offended with that example. But it's not like we've got somebody who's an expert in medieval French poetry who's saying, you can afford this, and this is what pension we want. We've got actual experts who have costed these things, and they're telling us, and Anne and I are not the experts in this, that this is totally affordable, that it's reasonable, and they're making offers to the universities. And to their shame, I mean, I hope it's none of these people's ex-students that are now in charge of these schemes that are sitting telling their ex-teacher, no, we can't afford it, it's too expensive. So I think it's important to remember that these are not just pie in the sky demands from militant union members.
Absolutely not. And I mean, the UCU itself employs actuarials to come in and do work with us in there. So it isn't just, you know, somebody like me going, well, that's a bit rubbish, make it better, let's have all out action. It really is genuinely based on people who really understand this and look at it and came up with different models. So it's been a, in a way, actually 2018 strikes were in a way easier because it was easier to move the employers. And this one has been particularly hard, and we've now hit this point where we're in direct, you know, it's difficult to see where we take it forward from here easily to get a resolution. But that, I mean, that's the outline of the pensions, and it sometimes can be spun in the media, you know, that we're greedy and lazy and we just want, and you're like, so we just want to have enough money to retire on like everybody else. You know, we've taken our wages throughout the years and we put that invested into our pension scheme that's supposed to be run for us to give us the best scheme that we have and allow us to retire. And it's
a good point, Anne, about. Oh, sorry.
No,
I was going to say, just because you're touching on the propaganda war, aren't you? And the what I would term this sort of transferred aggression type of approach, which happened when I was a kid. So there's a dispute between workers and employers, and somebody's going to get affected. You know, it's all the stakeholders of universities that are affected. And sorry to use that term again, but obviously students being the most obvious one. And so students get angry. So who should they be angry with? And so transfer their aggression to the unreasonable workers and teachers who are making crazy demands. And that's the propaganda war that we're facing. And as Anne's touching on there.
It is tricky. What I'm going to do is I've got somewhere, if my mouse would work. I was going to put the links into, where's my mouse? Why is my mouse not working? There you go, my mouse working. Find if I bang it off the table, it helps. I've got some links in here that might be helpful for people. I'll stick it into the Zoom chat in there.
Yeah, that'd be great. Marion, can I ask you a favour? Could you take a note of the links and posts? Thank you.
So that gives a good outline of why we're taking action in there. But the other dispute, and I think it would be fair as well to say, as Neil said, is that when we take action, the people who get most affected are students, and immediately. And that is really difficult and challenging for us because we're not railway workers. You know, if we stop working, trains don't run, and that's an immediate impact on obviously commuters, but it is there. But the immediate impact on us withdrawing our labour makes life harder for students, and it is not something we enter into lightly. I mean, to be honest, I absolutely loathe me have to go into industrial action because I don't want to not teach my students. I don't want to not do the work that I'm doing. But it is the nature of when you withdraw your employment that you know, as yourself, you know that tube in London's on strike and you can't get to where you want to go to, and it is frustrating, you know, or a museum's closed or whatever that might be. It is very, very frustrating.
It's the nature of strikes. That damage is going to be done somewhere.
We do understand it, and I think that we do understand, which is why I think both Neil and I are really happy to come along today to try and help people to understand it. But I'm just kind of think maybe useful to the Ford Fights dispute. So
just before we go on to that, Anne, I was just going to quickly say, I think one thing that's important, just going back on the point you were making regarding the pensions, I think it's important to know you could go far, far deeper into the weeds on this in terms of the way the finances are structured. But ultimately, at its sort of base level, the points you were making regarding pensions. The analogy I always give is of sports teams, where people sometimes get angry about sort of sports stars getting these extremely high salaries. But it's like, do you want the money to go to the owner? Is that what you want? Do you want the billionaire to make more billions, or do you want the actual people creating the sport to make the money? It's a similar thing here, where it's like there are certain pretenses being made, but ultimately Erasmus students are still been paying exactly the same amount to the University of Glasgow, exactly the same amount for those degrees. Shell has still contributing massive amounts to the University of Glasgow, and we've seen they're just recently buyed Russian oil. There are complex financial situations at work here, but the idea that it's as cut and dry as the faculty are wrong, they're being paid enough and the pension is fine. I think it's important to note, as you completely rightly said, Anne, it's different for older staff. If you're younger staff going in at this level, it's not the same as if you were working at a different level for so long that you can bear the brunt of this. If you think that this is the norm, wait until you're 60, 65, 70, whatever retirement age is, and then you'll see the true impacts of it. But anyway, sorry, we'll move on.
Sorry to delay it, moving on, but it's just on that point, and I don't know if this recording is going to be viewable by Anton Muscatelli, so do a shake of the head or nod of the head to just so that I know if I can make this point. But because you're sort of touching on intergenerational unfairness, which is a term I'm sometimes a bit uncomfortable with, because you know, we don't want to get into situations where kids are blaming their parents for everything, you know, and I'm getting to that, you know, I'm that age myself where my kids are starting to get old enough to blame me for everything. But Anton Muscatelli, we were chatting about this recently in the union, that he walked into a lectureship job, a permanent job, we understand, and you know, he must be, I don't know, close to retirement, and he's got a pretty healthy salary, and you've kind of got this situation of people pulling up the ladder, that they've got to that stage, they don't care, or whatever their reasoning is, or whether it's ideological or they genuinely believe that they can't afford something. But you do have that position where, yeah, the people who are going to retire tomorrow, or the people who retired 5 years ago, which did quite well, but people younger than I am, but also my age, you know, we're getting worse conditions, and they're going to be even worse when I know Yusuf or Alexandra and all the folk here, you decide to go into universities or whatever sector you go into, and it's going to be worse yet again. And are selfish people like me going to say, well, I don't care because I've got my retirement pot? So it's just, I just wanted to touch on that intergenerational element to it.
Yeah, I mean, I find that's a really interesting one. We could go in here for a long time about that, but I think sometimes that rhetoric can be. Yeah, I think there's something. It can. I worry about that. I worry about that because it can put people into boxes without necessarily understanding the wider issues in that point. So I have but I do understand, of course, that that it is harder. You know, there much more casualisation at early starts, much more, you know, people don't go into a job and stay in a job now forever. People move around and do different things, which to an extent is good and interesting. But there is, particularly in academia, there's the idea that certainly for younger early career staff, I should say, you don't necessarily be younger, early career staff, finding that permanent post without having to move around the country 4 or 5 times can be really quite challenging. So, and that's what happens, which kind of brings me to the 4 fights. So this is a dispute that's been kind of going for the last, started in 2019-20, yeah. And that's looking at pay, casualisation, this gender pay gap, and help me out here, Neil, I forgot the last one. It's appalling. Unmute yourself.
I didn't realise I'd put myself on mute. So equality, casualisation, pay rise, and workload.
Workload. How could I forget workload, Jess? That's it. And those hit some of the biggest things that we've seen in the last sort of 10, 20 years. And casualisation is huge. You know, the number of I mean, many years ago, PhD students would do a bit of teaching, and that was pretty much all the stuff. Somebody come and do a guest lecture. But now we see lots of precarious work, and not just at the graduate teaching assistant level, but people getting 6-month contracts, 1-year contracts, rolling 1-year contracts that keep going. People are unable to, you know, get mortgages, progress a career, all those things in there. So I mean, it really is huge. It is a massive issue for universities, and it just keeps going. And why is it there? I mean, I could go into long details, but it is very clear that, you know, like there's about a good couple of thousand people on fixed term contracts in the university, you know, through who may end up being redeployed, but they may have to move to a different city, they may have to go and do a different job somewhere else. A lot of our funding in university and research comes from external fund grants. So somebody might get a grant that lasts for 3 years, and they employ a couple of research assistants on that, but the research assistants aren't guaranteed a job after the 3 years. They may have to go somewhere else to find it, they may have to move cities, and we are seeing people leaving academia now because it's just that precarious. But I mean, even I, my great age, I was employed in precarious contracts at the beginning of it, and I was one of the lucky ones. You know, I got a post, a permanent post, but that was after about, you know, 5 or 6 years of going back and forward in casualisation.
I was going to say, just to simplify that right down, and what you're talking about is effectively people are being outsourced within the university. People come in and you can work for 6 months to even 3 years within the university, and you're never a fully fledged member of the University of Glasgow.
Well, you're a fully fledged member. You're properly employed by the university. So students people are employed by the university, and they are fully fledged members of staff. It's just that their contract will come to an end. And then you know, that 3-year contract will come to an end, or you know, we have students who are GTEs in particular, so you get PhD students or postdoctoral students who are being paid on an hourly basis. We have, at least at Glasgow, I mean, Glasgow actually isn't the worst of them. There are other universities out there who still use 0-hour contracts, where you can be employed, but you don't know that when you're going to be working. But yeah, so the casualisation, particularly at the early career level, is unsustainable, and it doesn't help the universities either, because we're not having, you know, you want people to come in and join and learn and grow and bring that expertise and knowledge with them, and you want people to feel fulfilled and enjoy doing their job. Pay, of course, is just pay. We always want to be paid more, but we've had a real term pay cut. We haven't had a pay rise to meet inflation for, I don't know, but certainly the last decent pay rise we got was in 2006. That was the last time I remember us getting a reasonably good pay rise. And beyond that, it's been, you know, 1.2%, and it's not where inflation is. And with cost of living rising now, that's going to be an issue. And then the other 2 issues are workload. Everybody's stretched, overly stretched to breaking point, and then equality, do things like gender pay gap, disability pay gap, LGBT plus pay gaps, Black workers pay gaps, and those issues in there, which are complex issues. And what we're looking for at a national, a lot of this stuff was done locally. So when I was secretary, I did a lot of negotiation with the university around about the casualisation, around about gender pay, the equality issues. But what we try to do with UCU is to try to bring that to a national level so that we can agree top level stuff that then filters down, so we can agree that we don't want to have whatever, but the employers just don't want to talk to us nationally about that at all. And these are the issues that have come through from members really strongly to the trade union, is that those are the big issues, one of which I nearly forgot, workload. That's because it's too much work. Neil, sorry, I've just kind of given a top level. Do you want to poke down a bit more into that?
Yeah, that was really comprehensive. I'm not particularly great on the specifics of what a settlement would look like in that particular one, because I don't remember the details of what commitments they're looking for on those. I'm certainly quite aware of what those issues are, and I know that as I said at the beginning, that I'm a caseworker. I would say that a large number of my cases, maybe 80%, are a byproduct of casualisation and workloads, probably those two issues. So casualisation that Anne's talked about, the fact that it leads to, so it's insecurity really is probably the key word that's associated with it. And the fact that people, even if they are doing quite a regular amount of work, but they're not recognised formally in a contract, because the university, and all universities, and as Anne said, some are worse than us, they avoid putting any commitment on paper, to avoid any kind of commitments in terms of redundancy, etc. And you can imagine the amount of stress on that. Now, if you're straight out of university yourself and you're 24 years old or something, you might perhaps expect that, okay, I need to build up my hours and whatever else. But you've got people of all ages and people with families. And actually, my wife is in this category herself, where she does quite a regular amount of work for the university, but there's a lack of commitment to formalising that and saying, okay, we're going to put you on a 0.3, let's say 30% contract. So full-time is obviously 1. So put you on a 0.3 or a 0.2 or whatever, and you know that you'll be working from, say, September to December in a particular institution. Universities are amazingly resistant to doing that. And so nobody wants to take sick leave because they're afraid that if they're not going into work, somebody else is going to take their work. So they work when they're ill. I mean, I don't know if anybody remembers that story of the delivery driver that died from pneumonia or something, and he went to work because he wasn't going to get any sick pay. I don't know if anybody remembers that story. And those stories probably not, it's not a unique occurrence probably. And we're almost getting into that situation in universities. I also saw on Twitter, it was a university worker saying she had to go back from maternity leave after, what's the minimum? It's like a month or something? You have to take a specific amount of time off. And she went back almost immediately because of this insecurity and worrying about her work. And so it also touches on equality. So insecurity and casualisation impacts women in particular. So it's something that we all feel strongly about, and I think everybody should feel strongly about. As I say, I'm not a master in the details of what commitments UCU are looking for on that, but I mean that gives you a sense of the type of arguments that we're making, and it's bad for students as well when you're getting taught by these teachers that are under such amount of stress.
This is really, you're touching on something that's vital and is very difficult, which is that, of course, medical conditions are personal information and shouldn't be shared. However, something students I don't think are aware of at all is the amount of health issues within the faculty right now, particularly mental health issues throughout the COVID. This is not just affecting the student cohort, this is massively affecting faculty and the level of burnout, whether it be physical or mental, through workload is just been absolutely enormous. I also think the points you were both making, it touches on the reason that trade unions are generally a sort of socialist concept, that ultimately it's all to do with hierarchies that are messed up, and you need to basically fix the hierarchies. And the more complex they become, the harder it becomes to fix them, because you're constantly sort of chasing after more and more complex problems. So I think it's entirely understandable why it's happening. Just before we move on to a couple of last points, can I ask, are you either of you able to give an idea of just what a faculty member's workload actually is like? Because I think a lot of students think it's a sort of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, you know, clock in, clock out kind of thing, but it's obviously very different from that.
Well, yes, it is. And so I think one of the big things I would say is we do not have summer holidays off, and that's a really basic thing that people seem to think that we all stop working at the end of March, we don't go back until September. That's some of my family think that. You're like, no, that isn't how it works. So we have sort of the standard sort of set of holidays that you might get, you know, 30 plus days plus public holidays, but that's it. And during term time in particular, your working week will be, I mean, if you're trying to do all the things that the university wants you to do in order to progress or achieve promotion and reach what you're doing, your workload will be consistently 50 plus hours, if not more. Sometimes you'll do less because of whatever. Sometimes you'll do more at particular points in your career too. I mean, I remember when my son was younger, I would be in the office, you know, 8:30 till 4:30, pick him up from nursery or school, get home, give him his dinner, put him to bed, and then I would start work at 8 o'clock to get through marking, to get through preparing materials, to get through all that stuff in there. And you get to your bed at 11 o'clock at night, late, and you're up again, and you do the whole thing, and it was just constant, you know, you were constantly doing that. And having weekends off was an unknown. I mean, a good weekend for me would be when I had the whole Saturday off, but it didn't. But you know, constantly looking at emails, constantly answering questions. And if you got a role like Neil and I both have, which is quite at the forefront, you know, so you're right, you're dealing with students. You don't want students to be waiting around, particularly if there's somebody's in crisis or wants to find whatever that might be. So yeah, the workload is huge in order to try and in order to do a good job at it. It is. So some of the stuff we're doing at the moment is actually short of a strike, and that's actually working to our contracted hours. So you might see emails out of office that say, I might not get back to you for a while. Now, I'm prioritising student work in that. So if I don't get round to doing some piece of admin that the university asked me to do until another week's time or whatever it might be, then that's fine. But yeah, so the workloads are huge. I mean, Neil, you know, you'll know.
Yeah, and I think you know, Anne and I are maybe well, we're both in permanent contracts. To touch on the workload for casualised staff, I can give you quite specific details, partly from my wife's experience, but also from my casework, that in languages where we are, up until, well, maybe last year or 2 years ago, when we squeezed out more time from the College of Arts, you used to get paid, okay, for an hour of teaching, so you get paid for your hour of teaching. You'd get paid an extra 30 minutes for preparation. Now, language teaching is not, I mean, that wouldn't be much for a lecture anyway, would it? But language teaching has much more preparation. But also that was admin was included in that. I think they used to give them maybe 2 hours admin per semester. So imagine you email your casually employed language teacher, and they spend, I don't know, 5 minutes writing that email. That's out of the preparation time for their class, assuming that they would do that. So, I don't know, 3 emails and then uploading some stuff to Moodle, that time would suddenly disappear. They wouldn't be preparing their lesson. If they were working to contract, they'd be turning up to a language lesson with no preparation. Of course, they're not going to do that. And so they're professional. And when you're working on the chalk face, they call it, don't they? The coal face, chalk face. You can't turn up to classes unprepared. You'd feel terrible, wouldn't you? And the students wouldn't be happy. So that's all extra work that you do. So I know my wife was spending at least double the amount of time on the work than she was getting paid for. so it's just to throw in the extra one that, yeah, but permanent staff and different teachers, different lecturers at different stages in their careers will be working harder, working overtime, particular periods in the year, exam time, etc. But for casualised staff, and what I see around the university, I'm not one for exaggerating it. I mean, it's horrendous, seriously.
Yeah, I think it's effectively teaching, particularly the fact that many new graduates or casual staff, it's teaching them that their intrinsic value is lower than it should be, is ultimately the lesson it's teaching. It's a terrible lesson to teach out of the gates. I can see time-wise we're wrapping up. So we'll go for, I get a couple of questions from the society. So one that came up was just, is there going to be more of an idea of how the strikes will look in the future for us effectively? Or is it still going to be the idea that disruption is sort of key, therefore more than likely they won't be announced with too much notice? Are either of you aware of that?
Well, sadly, the trade union laws means that we have to announce them very much up front, and we have announced that. So there'll be 5 more days of strike at Glasgow University in the week starting March the 21st, which I think is our week 11. And beyond that, that will be for both the disputes because we're wrapping them up together. Glasgow has got a mandate, without going into too much detail. We had a disaggregated ballot, so we some universities are taking part, some universities aren't. And Glasgow got above the 50% threshold that the trade union laws demand us to do. So we'll be taking action on that week 11. I certainly from DMIS, I'll make sure that I'll speak to colleagues and make sure that students know what any disruption that might be. Clearly some staff are members, some staff aren't members. So we ask individuals to talk to their classes just to make sure that students understand what might happen. Beyond that, there are 2 scheduled conferences, special higher education sector conferences, where longer term strategy, etc. will be discussed, and that comes through branches discussing at local level and then taking motions, ideas, thoughts to discuss at that level to shape the strategy going forward. But yeah, so that's the current state of play at the moment.
A second question that came up is, for those who are effectively angry at the institution rather than the faculty, where is the best place to direct that?
Well, actually in that email link I sent out to you, why we're taking action, if you scroll down there, it is it tells you how to support your strike. It tells you how to a couple of videos there to look at. But the best thing to do is to look at that page. I mean, you can email the management at Glasgow University, but that page I think has got some good ways to help do it.
One other thing that came up. Obviously, there's no denying it. The strikes, as well as COVID and hybrid learning, have had an enormous effect on sort of the cohort of the last few years. Is there any advice either of you had for how to make sure that, as much as possible, our learning as a cohort is not lowered? Are there ways that we can sort of catch up with what we're missing or sort of keep on top of it?
I don't know if there's a general answer to that. I think individually, different lecturers take different approaches to that. Certainly, I know that in Glasgow, we've kind of agreed never to examine students on things that they weren't taught directly by us. The good thing about Moodle to that kind of extent is that, even though you might not get the lecture, somebody might put up the slides from last year or have the readings up there at that point. I guess that's something for you to discuss with the individual course coordinators. Don't think, Neil, there's not really
It's a really difficult one, and if there's an answer, I'd need to spend a few hours thinking about it. I mean, one of the things that occurs to me, and this is not well thought out, so if you disagree, it's off the top of my head. But the money that the university saves from not paying us because we're on strike, maybe people should be demanding that money is somehow spent on later training, that they spend that money making sure that you get a decent education in a way that's not breaking the strike. But what are they? I mean, I think there was an agreement that the university, because they didn't offer this in the beginning, but I think they were persuaded to put that money to student unions or something. I'm not sure if you know exactly what happened with it, Anne, but they're not paying us when we're not teaching you. We're sacrificing our salary. What can they do with the money that will improve your education? That, as I say, I've not thought that through, so don't shoot me if it's a bad idea.
And just one final thing before we wrap up. How likely do you think, off of these series of strikes, that we actually do, that it's possible that we do get a resolution, or do you think this will be going on into next year?
That's a big question, Neil. I personally, I don't know. I really don't know. I wish I could give you assurances on that. I know that certainly my own personal view is that we have to think our strategy through and how we take it forward. And I think that's then an input from students. This is really helpful too as well. It helps us shape how we think about it. But that's questions for all the branches who are taking action. And for those branches that are not taking action, we are potentially reballoting because our ballot period runs out to look ahead. But I think that we'll have a clearer idea towards the end of April what it's going to look like for going ahead. That's the best I can say.
I'd say briefly on it that we know from our experts that for the USS that it's affordable, so universities can afford to do what we're asking for. So is there a will, and is it a who's going to blink first type of situation? When I first joined the union and went on strike the first time, I did some research trying to find out what success do strikes have, and across Europe it was something like, over the last 30 years, just slightly under 50% of strikes are successful, or to some degree successful. And I thought, oh, that's not bad, is it? Because you sometimes think, oh, they're all just a waste of time. And I'm not saying that we think that, but some people might think so. So, maybe statistically we've got a 50-50 chance of winning. I don't know.
I mean, I think it's fair to say is that we want to move the employers on both USS and those 4 issues we talked about. And as a trade union, we've got to think through the best strategy for our members, but also for students too as well. Because I mean that your education is why we do the job we do. That it's why we do what we do. I think that's important. So there will be discussions in that way. I mean, we've got to reflect on where we got to, and also what is practically and not practically, what's technically possible. There is that's some stuff I really don't know about. At that level of getting a revaluation or whatever that might be, and that's taking technical and sort of legal advice too as well within that to try and figure out where we go next.
Yeah, but I think one final thing just to say on all that is it's very important to note that as much as you're going to have to go in deep into the weeds to find out about it, like the economic modelling is there, the money is there. This can be done. This isn't a thing where we're saying, oh, do us a favour, can you students please pay twice as much for your degree so we can get paid? It's like this can be done. One final thing I was just going to say, because obviously we've had a lot of information from faculty coming to the students. I think from the students, one thing that came was, with the strikes, if possible, maybe this is just personal, but hopefully other staff members see this, is just speak to us face to face was a thing that sort of came up a lot, was that if they are happening, if you're in a lecture or you're even passing us and you do know us, just speak to us and just say, this is why I'm striking, or I'm a member, etc., etc. So I think what's happened is the biggest reason that the mood is slightly changing is that lack of discourse has meant it just felt for a lot of students like, here we go, another few weeks of strikes again. And it's just that sort of, it's becoming the norm, which is a problem, Right, guys, I think that's
really helpful, actually. And one of the things I think that we can do, and I think people have tried to do that, maybe it's something we could think about locally as a committee, is asking our staff to talk before the next wave in March, to talk to people about that. I'm sure some people do, but other people might not.
Perfect. Any final thoughts, or are we good to wrap up?
No, although here's a final thought. It was I saw this on Twitter. It was somebody that was going on strike, and I think he was an accountant or a finance expert, and he started in the 80s, and he was persuaded to work at university, and he said, yeah, but I can get more in the private sector, and the guy persuaded him because he said, yeah, you might get more money, but you'll have better work-life balance, security, freedom of speech, and a good pension.
Yes.
And he was saying, that's how I would sum it up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's that tacit understanding that for less money, for less pay, that we got better working conditions, security, and a good pension, and also a really enjoyable job. Yeah.
I think on that note, I'd just like to thank both Neil and Anne for coming this evening, and thank you to everyone for attending. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting us. That was really